and if you weren't here, then you were just consented on behalf of the other people, and we're going on this journey. Today, I've got a really good one. It's about the... Please turn the car alarm off and arrange for an upside-down rainbow for later, because that would be pretty cool. This is about the most epic road trip recorded in the Bible, okay? So if any of you are on your way out driving somewhere cool this summer, this one's for you. But I need to give you a little warning before we go any further, especially for those of you who received your primary religious formation here in mainline Protestantism, okay? That's like Methodists, Presbyterians, Congregationals, Lutherans. This book we're reading from today, you may never have seen it before, and I should just be perfectly honest with you, it might not even be in your Bible. Okay, I know everybody's thinking, Tobit, man, I must have zoned out that day in Sunday school. Why did we just hear Karen read it during Bible time then? Well, it's actually from a part of the Bible called the Apocrypha. Has anybody ever gotten a Bible and it says, the Bible with the Apocrypha? Which is a little section that's sometimes in our Bibles between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I checked, it's not even in the Pew Bibles, but I trust you, the Presbyterian police are not going to come arrest us all. I'm going to tell you why this is important. These are books, Tobit, Judith, Maccabees, Baruch. Maybe some of those are way back in the back of your minds. They are from the historical period before Jesus, so they belong in the Old Testament chronologically, but they are written in Greek, widely considered to be the language of the New Testament. So they fit in the New Testament linguistically. And because of this kind of discrepancy, nobody has ever quite known what to do with them. Since early in the Common Era, many Jews and some Christians have considered them to be canonical. That means part of the canon of the Bible. And a lot of Christians and some Jews have not considered them to be canonical. So there's been disagreement basically this whole time since we started talking about this, which is why they're often found in the middle of the Bible, just because everybody was like, we don't know what to do. Are they in or that? We don't put them in the middle. And we skip right over them. Now, in the Protestant Reformation, how our branch of the church got started, Martin Luther and the other reformers were super duper into biblical languages. And because of this discrepancy in the language they were written in, they decided that henceforth forever, these books were out. Okay, Martin Luther was not into the Apocrypha, which is why most of us didn't hear these growing up. But many Christians have and continue today to use these scriptures, including our Roman Catholic siblings, many of our Eastern Orthodox siblings. Though even those groups disagree on which ones are in and out, and even sub-parts of them can be in and out. Okay, it's very confusing. But there's some really good stuff in there, and there aren't very many other cool road trip stories in our Protestant Bible, so I'd like to tell you the story of Tobit today. Have I given you enough of an on-ramp? Okay. So once upon a time, there was a man named Tobit. And Tobit was, among all other things, a very good man, generous and ethical and kind. He was a Jew, the story tells us, who was living in exile in Nineveh, which you may remember from the book of Jonah, in the period of the Assyrian occupation of Israel. But despite living far from his homeland, Tobit fulfilled his duties as a Jew, not only his ritual obligations, but also his neighborly responsibilities. He was an upstanding family man and a philanthropist, giving money to those in need, but also his time and efforts. If a Jew in his town was killed, usually by a local overlord, Tobit would go out in the dark of night and collect the body and bury it as was customary for their people. Now, this last bit got the government folk a little bit perturbed, and they began to persecute Tobit, chasing him around and periodically divesting him of his belongings. But despite a few close calls with these local goons, Tobit's compassion and charity continued unabated. As I said, Tobit was a good man. But, as many of us learned from that modern prophet who's also not in our Bible, Dr. Harold Kushner, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And that's what happened to Tobit. So the first thing that happened was there was a heat wave, okay? We can maybe relate. And so he went outside to sleep because it was cooler out there. And the strangest thing happened. Some sparrows who lived in the courtyard were flying around in the middle of the night, as sparrows do. And some of their, this is a little bit gross, so cover your ears if you're not into that. Some of their droppings fell in Tobit's eyes, and he went blind. And he remained that way for 4 years. Now, because he could not work, his wife Anna went to work, and this caused some tension in their marriage. And they began to argue a little bit. And one day, in a particularly heated argument that had to do with a goat, Anna said something which I imagine she regretted later along the lines of, "I don't even know who you are anymore. You used to be kind, you used to be charitable, but now who are you?" And that was sort of the last straw for Tobit. And Tobit prayed to God that night that he would die. Now, change scene, right at the exact same moment. Someone else was saying the very same prayer. A young woman named Sarah a few towns over. Sarah had had a rough row of it too. She had been married 7 times. Well, almost. She had had 7 weddings. And as if that weren't enough to make one question one's sanity, each time she had arrived at the bedchamber on the wedding night, a demon had appeared and killed her husband. What can you do, right? The demon apparently, this is in there. I mean, it's not in here, but it's in some other Bibles somewhere, like at Powell's. The demon thought that Sarah was very beautiful, and he didn't want any man to be married to her, and he thought that, like, groom aside was the most effective means to this end. And so 7 times Sarah made her way to the ceremony and the toast and the obligatory first dance, or the 7th dance, whatever, and never made it to the next morning with her partner by her side. And what's worse is people really starting to tease her about this, even her own maids. And so she prayed to God, "This is so painful, just let me die." And God heard her prayer, and God heard Tobit's prayer. And a plan began to hatch up in heaven to save these 2 from their difficult fates, and the great angel Raphael was dispatched to implement this plan. Now, unaware of all this, Tobit was back in Nineveh. He was getting his affairs in order because he believed that God might actually grant his wish that his life would end. And as he made his arrangements, and this has never happened to me, but as he made his arrangements, Tobit remembered totally out of the blue that he had left a huge sum of money with a friend in his town called Media. And he decided that he should send his son at least to go get it back before he died so his family would have a financial cushion once he was gone. That's just good stewardship and planning. And so he got his son Tobias, and he sent him off on a journey to reclaim the treasure, along with some fatherly advice and the suggestion that if, while he was gone, he might want to pick up a wife that would be helpful for them while he's out and about. And after hearing his father's soliloquy about generosity and the importance of faithfulness and dedication to family, Tobias responded in a classic teenage fashion saying, "Dad, I don't even know how to get to Media." And Tobit, who's super exasperated, says, "Find a guide then." And Tobias packed his things, and he said goodbye to his mother, and he set out, along with his dog, to find someone to help him find Media. And who did he come across? We just heard, but the angel Raphael, disguised as one of their kin. And Tobias happily invited Raphael to lead him to Media, and the 3 of them, the angel, the boy, and the dog, took off. Now, while they traveled along, they stopped one night by the Tigris River, and while bathing there in the river, Tobias came across a huge fish, and he said, "Ah! What should I do?" And the angel responded, "Catch it!" Not taking you on any road trips. Tobias caught the fish, and the angel instructed him to preserve its organs, obviously, which Raphael told him had magical properties, such as the ability, listen for some foreshadowing here, to cure blindness and repel demons. What's going to happen? I don't know. So they're on their way to Media, and Tobias comes across a very beautiful but sad young woman named Sarah. And he says, "Oh, Sarah, you're so beautiful but sort of sad." And he said, "Maybe we should get married despite the fact that you kind of have a little bit of baggage, but I'm not worried about it." And Raphael was like, "No problem, I'm going to arrange the whole thing." And they got married, and they got to the wedding chamber, and Sarah was a little bit anxious because she was really going to like this 8th husband of hers, right? And she told Tobias, and he says, "Don't worry, I have just the thing." And he's like, let me just burn these fish entrails here like incense. Now, if that weren't enough of an aphrodisiac, he says, you know what we're going to do now, Sarah? We're going to pray. And so they kneel on the ground and they pray, and the demon, who was right at the door, got driven away forever. And so they enjoyed their wedding night in peace. And they got up the next morning, and everyone rejoiced. They were so surprised that Tobias was still alive. And the in-laws told the servants to go quickly and fill in the grave they already dug for him. I'm not going to make an in-law joke. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. And there was this huge celebration, and Tobias took a quick pre-honeymoon jaunt the rest of the way to Media and get his father's money and return to Sarah, and then they went back to Nineveh with their riches and their love and their dog. And when they arrived at his father's house, upon Raphael's instructions, Tobias took what was left of the fish entrails and wiped them on his father's eyes, and he was cured, and he could see, and there was great rejoicing. And here's a little postscript. After the celebration, Tobias and Tobit got down to talking business, including what was an appropriate wage they might pay to the guide that led Tobit safely all this way. And they decided to offer the secretly really Raphael half the treasure that they had gone to get in Media. But Raphael said, no, you know what? Don't give it to me. Instead, give it away. Continue to be generous as you have always been generous, and God will bless you. Continue to do good and to be kind, and you will be saved. For those who give alms, he said, enjoy a full life. And also, by the way, I am an angel from God, so you really should listen to me. Though really, he said this, how could you not have known that I was an angel of God? Because I didn't eat or drink anything for this entire road trip. And everyone knows that angels don't eat or drink anything, dummies. And also, FYI, you should write down this whole story and get someone young and attractive to play me in the movie. And also, you should keep being faithful and praising God, never forgetting God's marvelous deeds. And I'm going back to heaven now. And he did, and they all lived happily ever after, except for the part where the Ninevites were totally destroyed and everybody celebrated. But that's another story. The end. Okay, there's Tobit. See, it's the Apocrypha. It's amazing, right? A good story, a little bit different than the ones we're used to hearing in the Bible, but I hope you can agree it still has a lot to chew on. I'm going to throw out 3 suggestions, things we might think about Tobit. Maybe you have your own conclusions. And the first is practice generosity in all times, in all places, with all people. You know, our culture thrives on the myth of scarcity. Generosity then can take intention and attention to cultivate. What I think Tobit helps us to remember is that generosity is not a threat to fullness, but the genesis of it. Tobit's life was grounded in generosity. It's only when he strays from that path that things get really difficult for him. Likewise, Tobias's journey is blessed by generosity, and his happy return is ensured by it. So whether it's the coin in your pocket or a minute of your time, a space at your table, or a dose of whatever is precious to you, patience, forgiveness, the benefit of the doubt. Whatever you have to give, give it generously and be blessed in return. So that's one thing I think I take away from Tobit. The second thing is be open to new things even if they smell funny. Now I want to say very clearly, I do try to embody the instructions in the Bible, but I have never tried to rub fish intestines on my eyes and never really had occasion to. But I have had many experiences, as I'm sure you have, when new things seem fishy at first turn and then turn out to be a real blessing to me. I think so often we wander around in familiar paths and we have the same ideas and we eat the same foods and we sing the same songs and we forget to explore what else might be out there. I think to follow the way of Tobit is to agree to have an open mind and to believe that sometimes things come into our keeping before we can understand what they're for. So we have experiences, or there are people or opportunities or skills, and we think, what's this for? But in time, we find these things are actually our salvation. So I think the message here is, however you can open yourself to new things is an opportunity for the Spirit to be at work for you, and sometimes you just have to wait to to find out how that's going to happen. And here's a third lesson. I think this is all I got. Your companions in this life are gifts from God. Like the presence of Raphael in this story about Tobit is part of its miracle, right? The agent through which God's goodwill is worked out. But remember that for most of it, he's disguised. And so too can be those people in our own lives sent to give us blessing, guidance, and wisdom. Often we cannot see this, though it is quite obvious when we stop to think about it, what a blessing they are. You know, Hebrews famously reminds us to show hospitality to strangers, for in doing so we entertain angels unaware. But often I find strangers can be easier to accommodate and appreciate than those we know well. Strangers' needs are a happy responsibility, not a burden. They're oddness and novelty rather than annoyance. But when we try to see those around us as disguised angels dispatched by God to meet our needs in ways we don't expect, I think we grow in love and faithfulness. All those things Tobit wished for his son that God wishes for us. I just want to make one last point, of course, about the dog. The dog only appears twice in the story, when Tobias leaves home and when he's on his way back. And a lot has been made, actually, of the presence of this dog in Tobit, because everywhere else in the Hebrew Bible, references to dogs are negative, and they don't ever come close to anything that would resemble a pet. But here's this dog with Tobit going on this journey. And so as a dog owner myself, I cling to this reference to the dog as proof that God did intend for us to have relationships with animals, even when they are totally out of control and have no behavioral skills. But actually, I see in it this still small presence that is there between home and beyond, that is there between the now and the new. And I wonder if that's just a small metaphor for God's Spirit with us, a small metaphor for God's voice speaking to us, right? Just there in that liminal, in-between space, accompanying us on the way. And I would just remind you, it's only these new stories that let us ask these questions. And so thanks for going on the journey with me. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more from the Apocrypha as we go through the summer. But now it's time to close. So we offer these words in the name of the God who created, redeemed, and sustained us always. Amen. If this service